Hi and welcome to the Modern Love Podcast, episode 2. I am your host, Manjbara, your favourite neuroscience-based life coach. And let me start off by saying a massive thank you to everyone who listened to my first episode last week, who gave feedback. I'm genuinely so touched and happy that it was well received. And I'm really excited for today's topic. And I am a man of the people, so I did put out a poll on Instagram and it was an overwhelming choice that listeners want to know more about mixed signals in dating. So we're going to be diving deep into that today. What are they? Why do people do it? Why does it drive us so irrationally crazy? And how can you handle them without losing your sanity? And before we get into all of that, please do make sure you hit that follow button. It really does help the podcast. I've been watching Nobody Wants This lately, and I saw they got a podcast deal, so let's make that happen. Right, enough ramble from me. Let's get straight into it. Mixed signals, hot and cold, push-pull, whatever you want to call it. Let's start with what they are when it comes to dating. So for me, mixed signals are simply inconsistency in behaviour or communication that leave you uncertain about where you stand. It's kind of that swinging from one belief to another and experiencing that confusion, which typically drives us a bit crazy, looking for definitive answers. Now, it can come in many forms. You might be texting someone daily and there's a sudden silence or change in pattern. Maybe 1 minute a person is talking about future activities with you and then they're acting all distance. Or perhaps it's someone who's showing interest over text but never actually follows through with anything meaningful. And that's a really common one that I hear a lot of, where there's that mismatch between actions and words. And I think everyone listening to this has had experience with mixed signals in some form. And if we're brutally honest, we've probably given them ourselves. Likely by trying to be kind or let someone down gently, or maybe even through our own fears, fear of failure, fear of commitment, whatever it may be. And the reason I bring that up is it's pretty hard to avoid them entirely in your dating life because everyone's dealing with their own stuff. It could be uncertainty, conflicting priorities, people pleasing, emotional unavailability, difficulty committing, as I said, anything, right? But the impact is really real, very real. And I want to share a quick story from a client a few months ago just to illustrate this. And we'll call her Anna just to protect her privacy. But she had met this guy on Hinge. And for once, she actually enjoyed the conversation with him. And it quickly moved to WhatsApp. The texting was frequent and it was surprisingly fun. She met up with him, had a really great date. It was flirtatious, there were similar interests, even some playful touches. It was so different to the usual boring conversations. And I know you know what I'm talking about. When you meet someone on a date and it's kind of going through the motions, it feels like Groundhog Day. This was different. And Anna left that date thinking, wow, I had a great time. I'm sure he'll message. I'm sure this could actually go somewhere. And sure enough, pretty quickly, he did text her to check she got back safely. All good. But then after that, there was nothing. No follow-up or comment about the date or asking to meet again. And that really surprised Anna because she felt it went so well. And she was very confused and a few days went by until finally she was actually pretty agitated about it. So she messages this guy again saying, hey, look, I had a great time the other night. Do you want to meet again? And he replies, yeah, me too. What are you thinking? And something just seemed off. He's being a bit vague, not committing, not planning anything, and the energy is different. Anna can sense it, but all she can think of is what's happened because on that date, everything was going so well. We were clicking, there was chemistry. It wasn't like every single date that I've had where it's been so boring and dull. And now he's not saying no, he's not ghosting per se, he's not actually saying I don't want to see you, but he's hardly making an effort. So what's happening here? And before she knows it, she's replaying the date in her head, dissecting every detail, rereading messages, and her brain can't find the answer. And it's even distracting her from her work, despite being about someone she's only just met. And the reason why this has impacted Anna so much, and why mixed signals do this to even the smartest, most rational people, even with people we've not met, as in this case, is they create a psychological effect called cognitive dissonance. And this is so important to understand if you are dating, in fact, for any area of life. So let me dig into this a little bit more. Cognitive dissonance is a fancy term for the mental stress caused when we're trying to reconcile two contradictory beliefs or ideas. And our brains crave clarity. We're wired to prefer simple binary thinking. It's a yes or a no, true, false, right or wrong. We do not like nuance or grey areas. We want those quick rules. We actually call this heuristics in kind of psychology. These quick rules that we can apply that make decisions easy for us. So when someone's behaviour creates a clash between they're interested and not interested, we're ending up in this limbo and it drives us nuts. We need definitive answers. Now, I guarantee you everyone listening to this has experienced cognitive dissonance in their life, especially in dating. There are a few common symptoms that I'm sure we can all relate to. So if you ever had that feeling of a nagging mental itch you just can't scratch, that's dissonance. If it's overwhelmingly confusing and you can't decide, there's some dissonance there. You can't focus on anything else but finding the answer. You guessed it. When you're agitated and restless about what's happening, if you have these obsessive thought patterns leading to analysis paralysis, where you really just can't do anything, or even you perhaps start reading into every tiny behaviour and creating stories about them. Listen, I know we can all relate. We're all human. And it's also important to know that there are two key components to every experience of cognitive dissonance. And that's the primary belief. That's the belief that's more resistant to change, the one that you'd actually prefer to hold on to. In this case, Anna's was, hey, that date went really well, he really likes me. And then there's a conflicting belief, the information or evidence that's contradicting that primary belief and causing us discomfort. So for Anna, that's what's that sudden reservation? Why isn't he more proactive? Ultimately, it's has he gone off me? And for those of you who are keen on attachment styles, that can definitely influence how mixed signals affect you. So if you're in that more anxious response, typically, you'll likely be a bit more sensitive to mixed signals because you're on the lookout for potential signs of abandonment. You likely have more empathy and you can be a bit more you might tend a bit more towards binary thinking. You want a clear yes or a no. You don't like anything in between. Completely human, nothing wrong with it, it's just understanding our patterns. In contrast, an avoidant or a disorganized person will probably cause more mixed signals because they pull back a bit more, they're a little bit more inconsistent in their communication, and often they struggle with commitment. So the mixed signals is easier for them because they don't have to go one way or the other. They can sit on the fence in that middle ground and nuance and avoid having to stand on any hill per se. The other thing is really worth knowing as well is that mixed signals can spike dopamine massively. If you remember back in the last episode, we talked about how dopamine responds to anticipation and uncertainty, and that becomes addictive. Remember, dopamine is something that makes you feel good, and then you want to repeat whatever behavior led to that feeling. And so when someone's inconsistent with you, but it's definitely a yes and a no, which is really up and down, that creates a sense of mystery and anticipation, which can really lead you knee deep into your own detective drama, which frankly can be extremely absorbing and entertaining. I know plenty of people who love the thrill of trying to solve the case, trying to understand the behaviour of a guy they're dating or maybe a lady. It's far more common than we like to acknowledge. So just to recap early on, mixed signals are inconsistencies that leave you confused about where you stand. They cause cognitive dissonance, this mental stress from needing to reconcile the conflicting ideas. Your attachment style can play an influence, and solving the mystery can become this addictive dopamine cycle. So what do we do with this information? How can you solve cognitive dissonance? And don't worry, we're going to come back to Anna's story in a moment, just after I explain what we would do to resolve dissonance typically. Now, broadly, there are two strategies that humans go to if they have this kind of psychological tension. Option number one is you prove one idea or belief to be true. So you're trying to find that definitive evidence that just sways the argument your way. Option two is what I call integration, and that's where you consider what's more important than this and how multiple things can be true. And we'll come back to this. The default option for humans, though, Typically, the easiest thing to go to is option 1, where you prove one idea. And this works really well in science or ideas or areas where there are hard facts, but it's a really terrible solution for trying to solve mixed signals in dating. And that's because of something I call the dating dissonance trap. That's DDT, which I believe was a poison at one time, so I like to frame it kind of in that way. Let me just explain a little bit more about why that is so bad for you and why this is a mistake you must avoid. So when you try to prove one side of the equation, you inevitably end up seeking more information. And we often do that indirectly through thought, analysis, and research. And by thought, analysis, and research, that could be Googling online, thinking about things. It can be discussing with your friends, stalking social media, horoscopes, all of that stuff. And we rarely address the situation directly with the person for fear of being seen as needy. And in the cases that we do actually do it, we usually don't believe their answer anyway. And a big reason for that is confirmation bias. If we saw information directly and just accepted the outcome, it would be fine. We rarely do that because there's usually that dominant belief we're resistant to altering, something we want to be true, and so we don't see the full picture, only what we really want to see, more of what we want to see even. And so that leads us into that mental analysis phase. Can we find the answer through thought, research, analysis? But even then, human relationships are complex. In contexts like science, as I said before, you can seek information and find something definitive. I work with a lot of engineers, to be honest, in my client base. Very logical people, really intelligent. They like things to make sense in that kind of style, logic, and to be able to piece things together. Humans aren't rational though, and they are multifaceted. What makes sense to one person is completely wild to another. One guy can ignore your text and still really like you. That might not make sense to you and probably never will, but if you judge by your rules, you'll just be wrong and keep trying to fit his behaviour into your logic, which will drive you nuts. In the same manner, we have to be mindful of perception over reality. What you perceive as a mixed signal may be an interpretation. Not always, sometimes we have a really good gauge of this, but especially when you start going into that deeper level of analysis, you can really easily fall into this trap where you start misconstruing things to mean more than they actually do. So eye contact, or how a person stood, their body language, what they didn't say. There will be times that you are right, but a lot of the time it'll be an assumption, and all of the time you're not getting a fact unless it's coming from the person. Remember, human relationships, very subjective. Then it's equally important for you to realize as well, if you are always thinking about that person, trying to make sense of their behavior, trying to figure it out in your mind, it's so easy to start rationalizing feelings. And this is called the Ben Franklin effect, where you justify your actions by adjusting how you feel about that person or that thing. Because after a while of trying to figure out why are they behaving like this and why am I thinking about them so much, the options you have are saying, I've got nothing better to do, I'm just a loser, I've got low self-worth, which no one wants to say that. Or hey, maybe actually I really like this person and that's why I'm spending so much time and it's worth it. Again, it's just a shortcut for your brain to resolve the tension through justification. And finally, the reality for most people is that by seeking more information through thought, analysis, research, extra opinions, talking to other friends, is you get stuck in an endless loop of rumination. Every new theory, every memory revisited, every conversation you reread, advice, it only creates more confusion instead of providing clarity, because you're never going to the source and getting actual facts. And you become less focused on what matters, you waste time you'll never get back, and you can even start sabotaging other areas of your life. And this is exactly where Anna was when we started chatting. She had not addressed the issue directly with this guy, and she was still focusing on all these tiny details, working herself into a frenzy, and trying to figure out where it all went wrong. So what could she have done instead? As I will keep emphasizing through every podcast I ever do, core philosophy of mine in coaching, focus on what you can control. You can't control someone's behavior. You cannot see inside their head. You can't make them work on themselves. but you can control how you handle mixed signals and how you try to solve them. I am a strong believer in open communication. So first, I would clarify directly with the other person. Some people might say, hey, that's needy and that's unattractive. And probably, 5-10 years ago, I would say that too. But what I've learned through coaching people and growing myself and coming out of that avoidance space that really defined a lot of my life, the truth is, if you do this with a strong frame, with conviction and from a place of, hey, I know healthy relationships don't need games, I'm looking for something deeper, that is the way to go first, because you can get information from the source without spinning stories. Now, if someone says they aren't ready, they don't feel the same way, they don't want commitment, you accept the outcome. End of. The worst thing you can do is resist that because you want to prove the opposite, because you have a confirmation bias. That is a recipe for disaster and can lead you down a path of obsessive, unrequited love. I've seen it time and time again. If it's the opposite case, if it's a case of, hey, no, actually I want to see you again, or something positive, and then you're still getting mixed signals after that, then we can go into option 2, which is the integration method. So here, rather than trying to prove anything right or wrong, we want to consider the following. First, can you scan for any binary thinking or rules that you're operating in your own head? Is it possible you're creating some of the mixed signals in your mind because of these assumptions? Like, often we create false stories and assumptions, as I said. If he didn't do this, that means he doesn't like me. Well, is it possible for someone to not do that and still care? Is it physically impossible, or have you decided that? Another rule I often hear is, if he wanted to, he would. And that's complete nonsense, I promise you. Many guys don't have the tools when they're trying to deal with commitment issues. They can really like you and care about you, just not know how to do anything about that. And I know that firsthand because I was in that space. I wanted to commit, I wanted to get married, but I was too scared of my own stuff. I had fear of failure, there was difficult conversations to be had. None of that's to do with my partner. That was a journey I had to go on, and that's a different topic entirely, but it's just pulling apart those stories and assumptions. And that helps ease some of the tension where you're trying to prove an either or that's not required, because these ideas can actually coexist. And sometimes it actually takes the pressure of you being the issue and you being the sole cause of mixed signals, because rarely that's the case. A lot of the time it's really about the other person. And that's fine. Just knowing that is so important for you to take a logical and well-informed next step. Now, once we've done all this, once we've actually had that initial conversation, once you've looked at your own thinking, it's all about rising above those two competing ideas and asking, what's more important here? And often that will be something very simple. It could be finding someone whose actions matches their words. It could be finding a relationship where you're not second guessing yourself. Or it might even be to stop fixating over how the other person feels about you and start refocusing on the kind of relationship you want. And so what we do here is we spend far less time trying to solve the signals in our mind where we don't have any real information, where we're full of assumptions and our own beliefs and stories. And instead we resolve the conflict through seeing where we can edit our own beliefs, like challenge them, reduce that stress, and we can refocus, most importantly, on what is more important. And by doing that, we can identify the next action instead of staying stuck in our heads. In a lot of cases, that next action is going to be having a difficult conversation or maybe even walking away. For some people, it might be building a life outside of dating, so those moments don't have the power to consume them mentally. So they don't fall into that trap of it becoming this addictive cycle because it's so entertaining in a way, because they need to solve this mystery. There isn't anything else that's really making them feel fulfilled. Now, coming full circle back to Anna, after we chatted a few months ago when we first started speaking, she changed her approach. She decided to have an honest conversation with the guy from Hinge and ask about that change in behaviour. That's step one, addressing the situation directly, having courage, and I was so proud of that. He came back and he said, no, I really like you, I just have a lot on, and I'm not sure if I can commit to anything. So instantly we get new information because we confronted it directly, but there's still a mixed signal here, and Anna's still frustrated at that point. So we scan for any rules of binary thinking within her own mindset. And Anna noticed she didn't believe that he could like her and not want to commit. But that is an assumption. Again, it doesn't mean he's the right guy, just we're breaking apart some of these beliefs and stories that perhaps aren't fully true. They're not facts. But the real change came when Anna rose above all of that and asked herself what was more important for her. Really just took that time to distance things. What's most important for me? And for her, that was being with someone who didn't need to figure out issues with commitment and didn't leave her second guessing herself, because it still felt like he wasn't being truthful. And if it felt like this now getting into the relationship, what would it be like later? And so she thanked him for the date and respectfully moved on. Was it easy? Absolutely not. It was not natural to her, and there was initial resistance. I'm not going to pretend that it's such an easy thing to do. But think about the alternative. Going round and round in circles, analysing behaviour with someone whose actions don't match their words. Is that what you want? Anna had been through that and she had already felt the pain. And as soon as she made this decision herself and walked away, she told me how powerful she felt to reclaim herself and close that loop. It was a huge win because she snapped out of a very long pattern of rumination, majoring in the minors, and creating all these stories about herself being the cause of those mixed signals. And that's just one example. I've got hundreds of others, particularly where someone is giving mixed signals by saying they don't want a relationship, but then behaving like they're in a relationship, whether it's through affection, time spent, and vulnerability, giving all those signs, giving almost everything but the actual commitment required to move the relationship forward. And these are the scenarios where you have to avoid getting sucked into seeking more information through thought, and instead really find that courage within yourself. Dare to really deal with everything head on, challenge your own mental rules, and focus on what's more important to you. So let's just recap. Mixed signals is where you have that inconsistent communication or actions that leave you unsure of where you stand with someone. That creates cognitive dissonance, psychological stress that we are inherently wired to resolve. There are two ways we typically do this. One is to prove the belief right, or two is to integrate. Remember, when you are dating and you're getting mixed signals, the worst thing you can do is seek more information through thought, research, or analysis. Don't go to astrology. Don't spend hours discussing it with your friends. Don't spend hours rereading conversations, dissecting body language, Googling signs of attraction, going through endless theories. That just becomes a cycle that you cannot escape. You need real information, so have honest conversations. Challenge your thinking. Can two things be true? Are there rules that are dictating what you believe? And refocus on what's more important. Mixed signals are rarely about you and much more about the other person, in my experience. And the more you can pull that apart and not spin this story that you're not good enough and keep attracting guys who confirm that, or girls, the more powerful you will feel when you take that step and you break that pattern, and the healthier relationships you will attract over time. And the ultimate thing we're always trying to get to with any of this is what's the action you can take which moves you forward, that prevents you being stuck in this circle, which is so easy to stay in for months, even years, and actually find something real out and change the scenario that you're dealing with, change what is happening around you. So hopefully you found that helpful. If you're dealing with a situation yourself and you want my insights, do not hesitate to reach out. I'm always available. Instagram, hello@manjbara.com. I do feel that you've got the tools needed from today's episode. If you just want some help applying them, drop me a message. I can even create some cheat sheets if anyone wants to see them. But just remember, mixed signals is not about you, it's about them. Don't make it about you. Clarify, get real information, and focus on what's more important. Okay, don't major in the minors trying to figure out tiny things and what they mean and spin stories. Let's actually take action towards what you want. That's all that I wanted to cover this week. I hope that you enjoyed listening. If you did, please do drop a review and share this podcast with someone who would benefit. Next time I'm going to be talking about self-worth and self-confidence, so I'm really looking forward to covering that. But until then, have a great week, speak soon, and thank you for listening.